Okay, well, welcome to session 5. We're almost at the halfway point of this course. I hope you've all had a lovely spring break, and the weather has now changed for the better, but it's only a few more weeks until the end of the year, so this course will soon see it fly past. Right, so let's begin.
All right, so in today's session, we're going to talk briefly about 3 different methods for data collection. And then next week and the week after, we'll spend more time talking about the who, what, and how of data collection specific to your projects. But again, today we're going to focus on the big picture of data collection. Now, keep in mind that researchers spend years becoming experts in data collection, but even with a little training, you can become better at collecting data that's meaningful and reliable for your research. Most of you are going to be using one of the 3 methods that we're going to be discussing today, but we do encourage you to take some time to review the optional reading which we sent along, which will give you an overview of other methods that you could use for data collection. So the question that we're going to be looking at today is, what data collection methods will I use? And what I mean by this is that based on the research question that you have formed, which you may or may not carry out as an actual piece of action research, I'm going to be challenging you to think about, if that was your question, what data collection methods could you use to carry out that piece of research? Now, I know that we've been away for a couple of weeks on break, and so I wanted to start this session with a little bit of review. In a moment, we're going to show you the first 8 minutes of an 11-minute video, which has been produced by the Center for Collaborative Action Research at Pepperdine University. And the presenter in this session is going to use some slightly different terminology to some of the terms that we've been using, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to translate the terms that she's using into what we've been talking about. Following the clip, we're going to give you a URL for the website that's mentioned in the clip, and we're also going to send that to you as a follow-up with the session 6 materials. The website that we're going to give you is going to feature a whole range of free tutorials that you can use while you're trying to build your knowledge about action research, and also about some of these data collection methods that we're going to be talking. So we're going to go ahead again, we're going to share with you the first 8 minutes of this 11-minute video.
Hello, I'm Margaret, and I'm back to talk today about data collection. Now, I know for some of you, especially novice action researchers, will be a little bit nervous about data collection. And that's understandable because it might not be something you've ever done. But don't worry, as you move forward. Since action research is a process of continual learning, over time, you will develop the expertise to be really efficient and skillful action researchers. So don't worry, if this is your first time, you will develop the skills that you need to be able to do your first cycles of research. In previous tutorials, you developed your action research question and your logic model. Both of those will help you with your first activity in this tutorial, which is to develop your data collection plan. So you start with your logic model and you look at what your near outcomes are. And those near outcomes should have been what you use to form your research question. I suggested a research question in the form of, if I, and then describe the action that you plan to take fairly specifically, how or what effect will it have on? And then that outcome that you're looking for is what you need to measure. So if your outcome is student engagement, then you need to think about what evidence would help you determine whether or not students were more engaged. If your outcome was a learning outcome, then an assessment test of their knowledge might be a better outcome. If you're trying to increase collaboration or peer editing or collaborative work within the workplace, those are different kinds of outcomes, and each of them will have a kind of measurement that is appropriate to the outcome that you're looking for. So activity 1 is your data collection plan. Well, the first thing you're going to have to decide on is, what data am I going to collect? You can collect what people think, say, or feel about what happened by using interviews or questionnaires or surveys. Focus groups can be effective. Those are all different ways of getting at people's perspective. in the setting, and those are commonly used in action research. You can also use data that records what people do. As I said a minute ago, if you were looking at student learning, then an assessment test of some kind, either a self-assessment, a test, a quiz, some kind of a rubric, even the student's ability to be able to create a rubric could be evidence of their understanding of the task that you're trying to create. The other thing you can look at is what people do. To do this, you can look at performances in the classroom or in the workplace. You can count or check things. So it can be attendance, it can be things, if you're working online, it can be computer records. You can also sample during the course of an activity. So a frequent measure that is used in educational research is time on task. So at regular intervals, you can have your watch beep at 5-minute intervals, or just make a quick scan and give a percent of the people in the classroom or in the workplace or in the workshop that are on task. And then you can look at whether you increase in or decrease in time on task as you change the nature of the task. You can also collect things like photographs or videotapes or audio tapes that you can then use to look at behavior again and again. So, one way of collecting data is to collect it in the setting, making marks or taking records as things are happening. Another is to have a recording device, either an audio tape, a video tape, photographs, that give you a chance to look more closely at the data future point. And attendance at meetings, logs of meetings, things that happened in the meeting. One of the other kinds of measures that people sometimes use is where do people go for help in the setting? So how many questions were asked, who asked the questions, what kinds of questions were they? Looking to see where help was both offered and given is another way of, measuring the outcome of a particular implementation. Because if there is a lot of need for help, then it gives you some clue about the kinds of things that the students or the coworkers found difficult. So the next question in your data collection plan is, why are you collecting this data? You really want to collect only that data that will help you answer the question that you posed. So if you're asking about student engagement, then you really don't need to collect a lot of data about other things. Really focus on what is the outcome you're trying to create, and then really think about whether or not the data artifact that you're thinking of collecting is going to be one that really helps you get at the outcome that you're trying to measure. And then, of course, you have to have a data collection plan. When and where are you going to collect the data, how you're going to collect it. So that will be part of thinking through this process of collecting data. And the final thing that's really important is, do you have permission? Do you need consent to collect the data? It's important that you consider the ethical issues. We covered that in an earlier tutorial, and it might be useful to go back and look at that tutorial. And it also might be useful to check with your advisor, with your principal, with your supervisor, to help determine whether or not your plan is something that matches the dimensions of your job. You don't need permission if you're doing something that you would normally do in the course of your job. But if you're doing something that's a little different, then you need to make sure that you check that you have permission to do that. The second activity that I'm suggesting is one that will help you build your knowledge in research techniques. The tutorials or modules that I'm going to suggest were developed by SRI and the online evaluation resource library. So these resources are really designed for evaluation research, and I hope you can tell us what the difference is between evaluation and action research, but let me just give you a quick summary. Evaluation research is often done by outsiders who join a project that is being done, and they look at both the process of implementing the project, and that's called formative evaluation, and at the end of the project, they look to see whether or not the objectives were reached, and that's called summative evaluation. Action research is more like formative evaluation. That is, you're looking at things as they're going along with the goal of trying to make them better, but you're not an outsider. You are a practitioner in the setting, and you are looking at it not just once to give feedback, but you are looking at it over time. And it's the over time that is really important in action research. So it's a continual cycle of getting better at understanding what the variables are. But since lots of the techniques that you might use overlap with evaluation research, I'm going to suggest that you pick a few of the modules that they have developed and go through as a way of building your research knowledge.
Sorry, my comment.
Yes, yes.
All right, so we've stopped the video there. That was the first 8 minutes. And I wanted to draw your attention to this URL. It's for the Online Evaluation Resource Library. This is a library of free materials and tutorials on all aspects of action research, but with a lot of good resources around data collection methods. So as you begin thinking more about the data collection methods that you would like to use, if they're data collection methods you haven't used before, this is a really good site to go to try to find out more about some of those different methods. We just want to check in now and do a quick attendance because we had some folks who we knew were joining late. And I'm just looking through the list and it looks like, do we have Dawn?
We do. She doesn't have a mic.
We have Dawn now. Do we have Louise? We have Louise?
Yes.
Do we have Ruslan?
No.
And Simon?
No.
Okay, so I think that we are all here except Ruslan and Simon. All right, I'm going to show you now the paired chat matrix, and I want you to try to remember who the person is who we have paired you with for today. So today we're going to have Dawn working with Louise. We're going to have Denise working with Gabby. I'm sorry, I'm making some small changes here just because we have a couple folks who aren't with us. So Dawn with Louise, Denise with
Jane.
I'm sorry, Denise with Jane, Gabby with Tom, Kelly with Dee, and Lisa with Shobana. All right, so in a moment when we do get to the part where we're doing paired chats, those are the people who we would like you to direct your chats to. But before we do that, I want to take a look at some questions just to get us thinking about data collection, because data collection is something that educators, that teachers, that practitioners in education fields are doing constantly. And I just want you to take a minute to think about the data collection methods that you already use. Again, some of those might be formative methods, some of those might be summative methods. I want you to think about how you use the data, but also what's different about the data that you're going to use in action research in comparison to the data that you're collecting routinely on a daily basis. So I'm going to give you just a moment to think about those. All right, what I would like you to do now is to use your paired chat, and we're going to give you about 10 minutes to discuss those questions. If you finish the activity, please raise your hand so that you know when you are, so that we know when you're done. And we're going to move on to the next activity when everyone has raised their hand or when the 10 minutes has elapsed. And apologies in advance if we do cut your chat a little bit short. So again, the three questions that you're talking about with your partner are: what data collection methods do I already use? How do I use the data? And what's different about the data that I'm going to use in action research? Again, we're going to give you 10 minutes and we're going to count down for the last 3 minutes so that you can just see where we are. So, mic is open. We're going to extend the time for a couple more minutes because a couple of people had kind of some questions that delayed their start. So again, when you complete this chat, can you please raise your hand so that we know that you're done? Thank you.
Yeah, Denise. Jane.
Should we open? All right, there are several groups who have finished, and I apologize again if I'm cutting short your discussions, but I did want to take a couple of minutes to discuss those questions using by turning on people's microphones and allowing them to respond, and maybe you can feedback some of the things that you've been talking about in your paired chats. So I want to start with this question: what data collection methods do you already use, and how do you use them? If you'd like to respond to that, if everyone could put their hands down to begin with, just so that we know who's responding. If you would like to respond to that question, could you please raise your hand and we will open your microphone. Kelly. Kelly put her hand. Yeah. So Kelly, we're going to open your microphone.
Okay. Hi, Kelly.
Hi. I already use data collection in the library in terms of quantitative usage statistics in my databases, and I also use formative assessments. However, I normally don't get a chance to follow up with the students at the end of a lesson because as a librarian, you're in and out of classes and don't see students daily. So the excitement for me in the action research is being able to follow up on the formative assessment data and to be able to act on that, and instead of just knowing that they didn't get a concept but not seeing the students again.
That's great. Thank you very much. Someone else, please. Looking down the list.
Oh, I thought someone else
Shabana, we're opening your microphone.
Hi.
Hi, Shabana.
Hi. I use my data collection in the form of student survey and also peer evaluations.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to add something else? So again, please raise your hand and we'll open up your microphone.
Oh, okay.
Dawn.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi there. Hi. So I use data. The kinds of methods that I could use would be survey. I survey students. I survey teachers. I might survey parents. I do conversations where I collect qualitative data, anecdotal. I do observations. So I collect a lot of data that way. Yeah, that's a start anyway.
Okay, thank you, Dawn.
Great. Thank you for that. We're going to go on to our second question. And the second question is, what's different about data use in action research? And in other words, how is data that you would collect for action research perhaps different than the data that you would collect every day? And again, just to remind ourselves what we just heard, people talked about using quantitative data, formative assessments, peer evaluations, surveys for students, teachers, parents, conversation records, observations. How do you think data that you're going to use in action research is different from that data that you're using right now in your everyday practice? And again, if you could please raise your hand and we will open your mic.
Dawn.
Dawn.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi, me again. So I'm not sure if this is correct, but I get the impression that if I'm looking at data that affects other people, like for example, I might be looking at grade distributions or something of that nature, then that's one thing. But if I'm doing action research data, whatever the data tells me is going to really have a very specific effect on what I do. So it's going to drive my decisions on my actions.
Great, thank you for that. Would someone else like to respond to that question? Jane, please. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane. Oh, Jane, you need to unmute your own mic because you've got it muted. Okay, that's it.
Hello. Can you hear me now? I think that a lot of what we tend to do in classrooms is recording of, and as you said, not necessarily getting back to the data that you do record, but you're recording it to keep it, to show progress and so on. It's not necessarily recording for analysis to predict or to evaluate. You do evaluate, certainly in class. I'm just thinking of my own situation here where I look at maybe a concept analysis in documentation perhaps, or but it's what you do as a result of that, the action that comes out of it is what makes the difference, I think.
Great, thank you for that. Anyone else? Shabana?
Shabana?
What is the difference in the action research? Yeah. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes.
We can.
Hello.
Hello.
No. Yeah. The difference. Hello.
Yes,
the
we can.
The difference about the data and action research is the data is a long-term solution, while in the normal process it's used for immediate purposes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so maybe just to summarize a little bit the things that people have said so far. Of course, one of the most distinctive things about the data that you collect in action research is that it pertains to your research question as a researcher. Dawn was saying that sometimes you collect data for other people or for other purposes. In action research, the data that you collect is specifically for the question that you are asking. And Jane had noted that the data that you're collecting is not data that you would necessarily analyze in the same way that you would analyze data that you're collecting for action research. One of the things that I would add to that is that that oftentimes data that you're collecting in your day-to-day practice, although it may involve analysis, it often is just a single data source, whereas in action research, in order to conduct that more in-depth analysis, you'll actually be collecting data or looking at data from a range of sources, not just from a single source. Another interesting thing about your action research data is that I suspect that it may involve more qualitative data than quantitative data. Again, when we're doing student assessments, most of the assessments that we're looking at tend to be more quantitative in nature. And as Shabana noted, that the action research data, we're actually looking for change over time, which could be true of some of the formative data that you're collecting in your classroom, but it may in fact be more true about action research data. So thank you very much for all of those responses. We're going to go on to a slightly different activity now. And to do that, all that you need at this point is a paper and pencil. This is going to be a very low-tech kind of start to this activity. I'm going to give you 4 questions, and I want you to decide if those questions, if the correct answer to those questions is true or false. And if you just make a T or an F on your sheet of paper, we're going to go back in just a second and you'll mark your own quiz just to kind of see how you've done. So question number 1, a semi-structured interview is more effective than an unstructured interview. True or false? Question number 2, formative assessments measure progress towards standards. True or false? Question number 3, descriptive data is less valid than numerical data. Again, true or false? And question number 4, CATS, C-A-T-S, refers to classroom assessment tasks. True or false? All right, I'm going to quickly show you the answers to that pop quiz. And this is a kind of formative assessment that you might use in the classroom following a unit of study. So the answer to question 1 was, in fact, false, that either of those types of interview structures can be equally effective. Question 2 is true. Question 3 is false. Descriptive data is as valid as long as it's collected in a valid way. And finally, question 4, CATS, it's classroom assessment, but the T actually stands for techniques rather than tasks. So what I want you to do now is to calculate your score. So if you have only, if you had no answers correct, that would be 0%. If you had 25%, that would represent 1 correct answer. If you had 2 correct answers, 50%, 3 correct, 75, 100%, 4. We're going to put up a poll now, and I want you to select the number of correct responses that you had. So the poll will be launched in just a moment. As soon as it's launched, you can go ahead and put in your data.
It's happening now.
Yeah, it's happening now. I think we have...
Got 80.
Okay, so everyone has responded. So no one got 0. 1 person had 25%, 2 people had 50%, 3 people had 75%, and 4 people had 100%. Now, what I want you to think about is I want you to think about whether or not the result of this single pop quiz accurately represents your knowledge of data collection. And that's a rather rhetorical question because, of course, it doesn't represent your total knowledge of data collection. It represents the information you know about 4 very specific questions that we asked. The second question I want you to think about is, what would we learn if we repeated this quiz at the end of the course? So in other words, if we were to track your progress over time and looked at this as a formative piece or as a baseline piece of data, what would we actually see if we gave you the same quiz at the end of the course and looked at how your responses changed? Another question I want you to think about is, how could we have collected additional formative data at this point in the process? So by using this quiz is only one form of data collection. What other forms of data collection could I have used right now if I was really trying to gauge the extent to which you understand data collection in the context of action research? For example, could I have used an open-ended question and simply let you do a written response where you wrote down as much as you knew about data collection methods? Would that have given me more information, additional information? How would I have compared that information to the quiz response? One of the things that we want to begin thinking about before we start talking about the individual methods of data collection is that we want to remember that most typically in action research, you're going to be using a whole range of these techniques, not just a single technique. And in next week's session, I'm going to actually ask you to begin thinking about which of these techniques you might use at different stages of your action research project to create formative assessments of progress. The term that we use for this is triangulation. And again, triangulation is something we're going to talk about next time. But again, I wanted to kind of introduce this now because I now want to talk one at a time about three of the most commonly used methods of data collection in action research. So we're going to turn the poll off. And right now we're assuming that everyone is seeing the PowerPoint slide. Again, this would be the first PowerPoint slide with the word artifacts on the top. If you cannot see that, can you please type something into the message box that says that you can't see it? I know that in the past, sometimes we've had a problem getting the poll to turn off successfully. So it looks like everyone can see the PowerPoint slide, so we're going to go ahead and proceed. So the term artifacts is used to describe formative and summative assessments. Artifacts are only one type of data collection. You use them in your classroom every day. They're also used in action research. Now, it's important to remember that artifacts can be student-generated. And what we mean by that is that student-generated artifacts would be quizzes, tests, other physical assessments that you give to a student where they're doing all of the work. And of course, there are a wide range of those kinds of tasks, and some of those were highlighted in the 50 CATS article that was included in this week's pre-session reading list. And again, CATS meaning classroom assessment techniques. But I also want to point out that an artifact can also be teacher-generated. So if you as a teacher keep a teaching journal or a reflective journal, the information that you're recording in that journal, which is very qualitative in nature, is another type of artifact. Okay, so artifacts are the first type of data collection method used in action research, and again, it's probably the type that you're most familiar with. The second type of data collection that we're going to talk about today are observations. And when we are talking about observations, we're talking about what you can see. It's important to remember that observations aren't inference statements. They're not statements of what you think is happening or interpretations of what you're happening. They're actual representations, data collected about what you can actually see. And the thing about observations is they only become data when they're recorded and analyzed and evaluated. Yep, so you need to have a formal method for recording observations. Observations can be recorded as descriptive or qualitative data, which use words to describe your observations in depth, and typically you're looking at only a small set of participants when you're doing that. But observations can also be organized and coded, and once they're coded, they can be counted and turned into quantitative data. So observations can take a lot of different forms. They can start with a checklist of relevant behaviors that you use to kind of gauge what the class is doing at a point in time. Observations can include photographs or audio or video recordings of your teaching. They can include notes that you take during an observation period. And they can also include journal entries that are written really quickly after an observation period or immediately following an observation period. I just want to show you really quickly. I know that a lot of you have used observations before, but I wanted to show you an example of an observation form. And the interesting thing about this form is that this form uses a checklist of anticipated behaviors as well as giving a space for the teacher to put in notes. This is an observation sheet looking at mental strategies in mathematics. And you can see that she's recorded the students' names on one side, and when she observes these behaviors, she's using the checklist, but then she's also using additional annotation to give a more descriptive account of what she's actually seeing. I know that observations tend to be used a lot more in younger grades, so in early childhood, almost all formative assessment is based on observation, but increasingly they should also be included in observations of older students up through secondary school. Now, one of the great cautions in using observations is that it's really important to only record what you actually see. There's a great Peter Senge quote that says, "We see the world as we are, not as it is." And it's very important that your observations don't turn into inferences, that they don't turn into things, into your interpretations or your analysis of situations. That's not what an observation is. And to kind of help us think through that a little bit more, I'm going to show you a picture right now. And in this picture, we have a rectangle with two lined representations using two lines. And in the chat box, can you just type in what you see? I want you just to observe. Again, use your chat box and just type your responses in. Yep, Dawn sees two crosses.
Yeah, Denise sees
yep, do you see two crosses, one bigger than another? Two crosses, two graphic organizers from Kelly. Two crosses from Lisa. Two crosses each with longer vertical lines, one smaller than the other. Two blank tables from Tom. Two crosses from Gabby. Now I'm going to change this around a little bit and show you another image and ask you if you had learned that the image that you saw represented two telephone or utility poles, how would that change your perception of what you were looking at? And again, this time if you'd go ahead and raise your hand instead of using your chat box. So what if we first showed you that first piece and you had written that up, made that observation, and then we said, oh, no, this is what it actually represents, two telephone poles. Shavana, we're going to open up your mic. Hi, Shavana.
Oh, hi, Shavana, you need to unmute your mic. Just got it muted.
Yeah. Shavana has her mic muted. There she goes. Hi, Shavana.
Hi. I think my perception would be that, if you look at it with a deep insight, it would definitely represent to me as a telephone pole.
Okay.
So it depends on how you see different things with your own perspective.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And Kelly?
Right, go ahead, Kelly.
That context provides a great deal of focus. And now I see, the size is related to the distance, and so many other associations are discarded and others are brought in by it's all context.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much for that.
We've got Dee. Oh, just put her head down. No, Dee. Hi, Dee.
Okay, I found that as soon as I had the context of the telegraph poles, I started imagining the diagrams with the wires and things put in. So my brain immediately went back to fill in more detail onto those two bare crosses.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to change the question just slightly, and now that you all have kind of shifted your perception a little bit to see those lines as telephone poles, what if you learned that the image represented two scarecrows, after all, that it really wasn't two telephone poles, that in the end you'd interpret it as telephone poles, but they really were scarecrows? Again, go ahead and raise your hand. Jane.
Okay, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. It would obviously have an impact on whatever it was that you were observing for. If you had, in your head, you had them down as two crosses, you have the aha moment, but then, of course, it makes your analysis, it throws it completely out if you've observed something that actually has no relevance to what you'll have skewed your results.
Yep. Great, thank you. Shavana? Hi, Shavana.
Yeah, hi, Ben. My perception would be, how did I see that wrongly?
Mm-hmm.
Because it was simple two lines, and how could it become a scarecrow?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Part of the reason that I asked you that question is that Kelly, with the telephone polls, had talked about how the fact that the context provides focus for interpretation. But one of the most strongest thing that sets that context are your own personal assumptions and biases about what you're looking at. And one of the really challenging things about action research, because you as the teacher who's actually carrying out the lesson, doing the observations, are also the researcher, one of the really key things is really working to understand your assumptions and the biases that you bring to a particular project. What you want to make sure that you do is that you don't actually see the things that you want to see, but rather that you are able to kind of create some distance between yourself and that observation to really do a good objective observation. Remember, an observation is just what you see, and you're trying to filter out all of your assumptions and biases in the process of recording observations. So again, thank you everybody for those comments and for those observations. We're going to talk now briefly about a third type of data collection, and that type is interviews. Interviews are a method for data collection that use a protocol to systematically collect information from participants. And in most of our cases, that means students, but it could mean colleagues or parents. Now, one type of interview, and there are several that we're going to talk about, is a structured interview. And some of the characteristics of a structured interview are that all of the participants are asked the same questions in the same order in a structured interview. So you've developed the questions in advance, you have tested them out to make sure that they work, and when you actually go to deliver them, every single person you talk to, you ask them the same question in the same order. Typically, all of the questions are simple and direct, and they should not require additional prompting or explanation from the person conducting the interview. The questions should not be leading, so they shouldn't kind of suggest what the correct response would be. They should never have simple yes or no responses. The whole point of using the interview is that you're trying to get rich data, not simply binary data like yes or no. And you need to be careful that the questions don't ask more than one question at a time. So ensuring that the questions have a single focus and that don't combine two different questions at the same time. So in this picture that we're using, the teacher's conducting an action research project on literacy. And I was wondering if if all of you actually in your chat box, can you type in if this teacher was trying to explore some literacy topic in her classroom with, obviously these look like lower school students, what's an example of a question this teacher might use in her interview? Remember that the question should be simple and direct. It shouldn't need additional prompting. It shouldn't be leading. It shouldn't have a simple yes or no response, and it shouldn't be asking more than one question at a time. So if you could please go ahead and type a question that might be used in a structured interview on literacy.
Okay, so Denise, what types of books do you like to read? D has gone, what genre of books do you most enjoy reading? Tom's saying, describe something you learned about this topic. Lisa, what did you learn from this story? And Dawn's asked, who was the main character? Oops, I've lost it. Who was the main character of the story we just read? Shabana, it's quite a deep question. What is analysis? Kelly, what questions do you have about the story?
That's all great. And one of the things I'm noticing about all those questions is that one of the things that they're really good is that they are only asking a single focused question at one time. And they're simple enough that, with the exception of and I guess with Shabana's question, it would depend on to what extent the class had talked about analysis, but always making sure that the question doesn't need additional response. In a structured interview, one of the things that you want to be certain of is that one of the people who you're interviewing isn't given a lot more information about the question than other people, because that would prompt them to respond in different ways. And that's why you want to keep the question simple and direct and requiring no additional explanations. Again, none of those were leading. We didn't ask any questions like, what was the worst thing about this badly written book, which would be a leading question. And none of them had simple yes or no responses. So again, you're really trying to get rich data in an interview, not the kind of data that you could easily get from a survey or a questionnaire. So thank you very much for that. I want to talk about another type of interview, which is a semi-structured interview. In a semi-structured interview, the participants are asked the same or similar questions based on a predetermined topic, but the interviewer is free to ask further questions or to change the order of the questions. So just like the structured interview, it has a set of questions that it begins with that have been well thought out, that have been tested, but in the semi-structured interview, the interviewer may decide to eliminate one of the questions, to ask them in a different order, or sometimes even to ask the person who they're interviewing to give additional details. Sometimes a few semi-structured questions are better than a lot of structured questions. So again, in this process, you would be allowing the participant to kind of determine the direction that the conversation goes in to some extent, rather than structuring the conversation through a series of questions that don't change. And also, if the interview has this opportunity to ask further questions, you can often acquire more in-depth information. A third type of interview is the unstructured interview. In this type of interview, the participants are asked one or more open-ended questions related to the research topic. So good unstructured interviews tend to be conversational, and they typically include only a few, 1 to 2 to 3 specific questions. In order to help the participant give a deeper answer, the interviewer has the option of asking questions that are hypothetical. They might be asking the participant to describe an ideal situation. They might be asking the person who they're interviewing to take a contrary point of view and explaining that. And just as an example, a teacher using cooperative learning may ask a teacher to describe how they would use cooperative learning in their ideal classroom setting. So if you were trying to get an idea of how teachers were using cooperative learning, you could, again, using that hypothetical, how would this work in an ideal classroom setting for you? And again, the type of interview that you would use depends a lot on the research question you're trying to answer. So all of those interview types that I've talked about so far typically are one-to-one interviews. There is a fourth type of interview, which is the group interview. And in a group interview, participants are asked questions together, and you do that to reveal information about group dynamics or the way that the group thinks about a topic. If you're considering group interviews, and they can really be interesting things to do with groups of students as well as with adults. But one of the things you need to be careful to do is to create an environment where everyone feels safe and free to express themselves. You don't want to have a situation where you have a kind of imbalance of power within a group. So, if you were discussing a question that was sensitive, you may not want to have the division principal in the same group with a teacher, because they may not answer as honestly as you would like them to answer. So you need to think a lot about the groupings, about the composition of the groups who you are interviewing. You also want to tell the participants whether or not their comments are going to be attributable to them as individuals, or whether their comments are anonymous. And that's actually true across all the interview methods. So just an example of a topic that might benefit from a group interview approach would be something like students' attitudes toward online bullying, where you would actually want to see the social dynamic of that response as much as the individual dynamic. Another question might be the role of a dress code in respectful social interactions in high school. Again, because the social dynamic is important to answering that question, that individual student positions. All right, so we've looked at 3 different data collection methods. In the case of interviews, we've looked at a series of different types of interviews. And next week, what you're going to be doing is you're actually going to be deciding what type of data collection methods you're going to use at different stages of your action research project. And so to kind of get you thinking about that, I'm going to be showing you a series of action research questions. and I'm going to ask you to select a data collection method that you might use. And I want you to select between a formative assessment, and again, here we're talking about an artifact, an observation, or an interview, and it can be any of those types of interviews. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a question and give you a moment to think about it, and then I'm going to ask you in the chat box to just type in what type of assessment you would use. So let's go to the first question. So if your research question was, how would asking higher level questions improve the quality of student participation? What types of assessments do you think you might use if that was the question that you were investigating? And again, if you can go ahead and type it into the chat box. All right, so
everyone said observation.
Yeah, unanimously, everyone has written in observation. So next slide. So no one has said artifacts or formative assessments. Could you raise your hand and say why you didn't choose that? Why do you think that's a less appropriate data collection method for this particular question? Again, if you'd raise your hand, if you could respond to that. Shabana. Yep. So you're unmuting your mic.
Oh, right. Shabana, you need to unmute your mic, please. Okay. Okay.
Hi, Shabana. So why do you think why did you not choose formative assessment as a data collection method for this question?
Because the higher level questions, the students can answer the higher level questions only through a much challenging kind of work, and that's why I chose quizzes.
Okay, so in order to understand if they were actually asking higher level questions, you might need to actually collect some artifacts and correlate those quizzes to have evidence of higher level questioning with the observations. Okay, a lot of you did say observation. Go ahead and click the slide. So if someone could just raise your hand and tell me why observations seem like a logical choice for a data collection method for this question. Yep, Dawn, go ahead, please. We'll unmute your mic.
Okay, Dawn.
Hi. So I think it would be really easy to sit in the back of a classroom knowing that a teacher was going to be asking higher level questions and then just count for that teacher. So I think it would be, it just, to me, you know, it would be the easiest way to incorporate that into an observation.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Again, no one said interview. I was wondering if someone could raise your hand and tell us why you think that interview would not be a desirable data collection method for this particular question. Jane.
Jane?
I think what happened to me, I don't know if it happened to anybody else, I saw participation, I saw hands up, I didn't read quality, I didn't read higher level, and it was participation as a visual thing. But if you're looking for quality of response or quality of participation, you could just as easily interview a child and ask some of the higher level questions and then take down what they evaluate what the answers are, if it's a verbal response you're after.
Yep. Yep, thank you for that. And again, one of the things to keep in mind is that oftentimes our own personal perception of how do we identify high levels of participation, that we may actually define that as participation in class discussion. But there could be other ways that students are engaging in those higher level questions, which would indicate that they're participating, but perhaps participating in a different way. And by interviews, you might be able to unpick some of that so that you can actually expand that observation list to include some other behaviors that perhaps you're not looking for at that point. So again, one of the things to always keep in mind with these action research questions is that while one data collection method may quickly rise to the top as the one that makes the most sense, it is important to kind of challenge yourself and say, well, if I were looking at this situation, what artifact, what formative assessment might I use, or how might I use an interview to collect more data? Because we're trying to collect data from multiple sources and then triangulate that data or compare that data to confirm or to better understand the extent to which our observation is accurate. All right, thank you. We're going to go on to a second question now, do a similar kind of activity just for a couple of minutes. So the next question is, how will implementing cooperative learning improve math performance in my class? And again, what is the first form of data collection that you would use with this question? Formative assessment, observation, or interview? Go ahead and type it into your chat box, please.
Tom says formative.
Okay, Tom says formative. Don formative. Kelly interview.
Formative. Oh. D saying formative, observation, and interview. Jane saying observation and formative.
Okay, so
observation.
Do D for interview,
yeah.
And for observation, Gabby. I'll go back up and find someone else for formative. Tom, did Tom say formative?
Tom said formative, yes.
Okay, so I was hoping that, Tom, could you, we're going to unmute your mic, could you tell us why you said formative?
Yeah, I think when you're analyzing someone's performance, we often do that in a test or a quiz.
Yep.
So.
Fantastic. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I would agree with that. And Gabby, can you talk a little bit about observation?
Sorry. Okay,
go ahead, Gabby.
Because when I'm thinking of collaborative learning, I'm thinking to observe their behavior, their involvement.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And let's go to D and hear about why you would use interview or how you would use interview.
I think the other two are really valuable, but I think to also speak to students and ask them for their perceptions of how easy or more difficult the cooperative learning was for them. Did it actually help them to learn more easily or not? So I think by actually speaking to maybe even a random selection of students, you could find out their own experience of it as well.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm hoping that what you're seeing is that if you listen to the responses that each of these people have given in terms of formative assessment, observation, interview, you can quickly begin to see how you can build a plan for data collection where you would be collecting data from multiple sources in multiple ways in order to give you much richer information around the question that you're asking. We're going to do one more question and then we're going to move on. And it's the same thing. The question this time is, how does parent support affect my students' emerging literacy skills? And again, if you think you would use formative, observation, or interview in this particular situation, please go ahead and put those into the chat box. Okay, so Denise, interview.
Yeah.
Who said observation?
No one said observation.
Someone who said formative.
Yeah, Kelly.
Kelly. Yeah. Great, thank you for those. Kelly, can we have you say a little bit about formative assessment?
Right, Kelly, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I had put interview, but
Oh, sorry. I thought you put in formative.
That's okay. For formative assessment, of course, that's going to give you a gauge of the changing development of the student's skills, and then just to pair that with interview on the other side, understanding what kind of support the students are getting at home by interviewing the parents.
That's great. Thank you. So Kelly, the one thing you left out is observation. Off the top of your head, can you think about how you might design an observation data collection method that would further kind of triangulate those two methods that you just described?
Wow.
What might you look for? So what behaviors might you look for in your classroom to have evidence of literacy skills?
Yeah, I guess observation in this case, I might want to do it as a video observation and to be able to go back and look at it with a deeper analysis later. I don't think it's the kind of thing that would work in a tally method of observation. I think I'd want to record the lesson and then go back and look at places where I could visibly see students struggling with a certain question or a certain activity that we were working on related to literacy.
Yeah. Great. I apologize for putting you on the spot, but that was a great response, so I'm glad that I did it. Yeah, we haven't really talked very much about using video as an example of data collection for observation. But in this case, again, one of the things you might be looking at is during a reading time, to what extent is that child on task with reading, and to what extent you can look at how they are actually handling the book, and for evidence that they're actually reading the book, and that could be then followed up with an interview afterward, asking them questions about what they just read. And so, combining observation and interview with the formative pieces to understand how students are progressing, how their literacy skills are developing. Again, teachers often will use all of those different strategies, especially when you're looking at something like literacy in their classroom already, but they lend themselves really well to data collection for action research. So thank you for all of those responses. And at this point, that really kind of brings to a close the things that we wanted to talk about in today's session. Does anyone have any questions today about what we've talked about? And again, just to summarize, we've talked about 3 data collection methods, and we've recognized and acknowledged that there are other methods beyond those 3. And some of those other methods outside those 3 may be things that you may want to look at. And again, we can send you in the direction, if you have questions about other methods, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we can help you out with those in terms of finding training materials around them or giving you some guidance. So any questions about today's session? All right, I'm going to turn over to Latifa, who's going to kind of explain the closing bits of the session.
Thank you. Right then, so as we reach the end of this session, I will be sending out a checkout survey straight after this session. So please complete the survey. It will help us to improve this course. And as soon as you have done, please let me know by email, and I will send you the session 6 materials for next week. Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to emphasize that we do look at those checkout surveys every week, and I'm hoping that people who've written specific comments have kind of seen small changes in the way that we've been approaching the way that we're delivering the course. So that feedback is really valuable for us, and thank you for that each week. I know that it takes a little bit of time, but again, thank you so much for that. I do want to kind of make a suggestion, although this isn't a requirement. It's something that you might find useful, and in action research typically isn't done just by, Yes. The first slide is Learning Log 5.2, which is recording your learning points. Again, this is an optional activity for you, but it does give you an opportunity to kind of consolidate your learning, reflect on what we've talked about today, to record learning points, to record things you want to look into further. It's just a good place and a good practice to think about these sessions after they conclude each time. Learning Log 5.1, which you worked on in preparation for today, I would really encourage you, although this is an option, to get in contact via email with the person who you did your paired chat with today, or anyone else in the course, if you'd like to get some feedback about your research question and the other tasks that you worked on. Action research is never an activity that is done in isolation, and if you were actually involved in an action research project, you would structure and you would actually schedule times to share what you're working on with colleagues, with coworkers, with your direct line manager, with us if you were working on a SIM project. And to the extent, especially those of you who may be working on a question that will turn into an actual project, this is a really good time to get some colleague feedback before you begin then looking more next week at the data collection methods. So again, it's completely optional. But if you do find the time, and if you are planning to take this action research piece forward, this would be a good point to discuss what you've been working on with someone else.
Right, so that brings...
Yeah, so that's all that we have for you today. Again, next week, we're going to be looking again at data collection methods and triangulation. Latifa will be sending out all those materials as soon as we get your surveys back, and we will be sending you the link to that site that we mentioned following the video this morning. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you. Bye.